good and faithful servant.
And I heard, as it were, the voice of a great multitude, and as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of mighty thundering, saying, Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent who reigneth. Let us be glad and rejoice, and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready. And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of saints. And he saith unto me, Right, blessed are they which are called unto the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he saith unto me, These are the true sayings of God.
You know, the hopeful elect, of which we believe we are according to faith, and the importance of being of that group called the elect, which are also known as the church of the firstborn in the scriptures. Firstborn meaning the first spirits created. And it would make sense the Heavenly Father would take the first spirits created to be the rulers of the nation, the aristocrat, if you will. If you know the words, the word aristocrat literally means best rule. The first spirits created are the best ones to rule. That's why Yahweh Shai is the first of the first, and he's the best of the best to rule. You know, Yahweh Shai will be ruling in the next kingdom, and right underneath him will be King David, you know.
But ye shall be named the priests of the Lord. Men shall call you the ministers of our God. Ye shall eat the riches of the Gentiles, and in their glory shall ye boast yourselves. For your shame ye shall have double, and for confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in their land they shall possess the double, everlasting joy shall be unto them. For I the Lord love judgment, I hate robbery for burnt offering. And I will direct their work in truth, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them. And their seed shall be known among the Gentiles, and their offspring among the people. All that see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the seed which the Lord hath blessed. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall be joyful in my God. For he hath clothed me with the garments of salvation. He hath covered me with the robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decketh himself with ornaments, and as a bride adorneth herself with her jewels. For as the earth bringeth forth her bud, and as the garden causeth the things that are sown in it to spring forth, so the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring forth before all the nations.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers. And peace and blessings and salutations to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful lake, the believers, the listeners whom have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. All right. And what I want to get into today, is going to a new devil, same play, from Reagan to Trump, and I want to go into the similarities, all right, and the policies, okay, dealing with Reagan, all right, and how they tie into what we're seeing on the Donald Trump, all right, and on the Reagan, this is where you see, all right, the corporations, began to really be favored, okay, by the government, you know, okay, and it's under Reagan, where you see, all right, the working class, okay, begin to be left behind, okay, in the economic growth of America, okay, and it's led to where we are today, to where the corporations run government now, okay, and now, all right, they're in position to what? Switch from democracy to a technocracy, okay, and Ronald Reagan, he played a pivotal part, okay, and where we see the wealth gap between CEO and employees. He started that, okay. And at the end of the day, all these devils, all these presidents have been, juiced in, some more than others, okay. And certain ones, they were really, put it to the American people. And Ronald Reagan was one of them. That devil there, he did a lot of wickedness, during his 2 terms, okay. From drugs, okay, to the war on drugs, which no one sold, no one sells more drugs, okay, than the American government, okay, and the CIA. All right, but you had the war on drugs, setting Jacob for failure with, all right, the crack laws, okay. You see, making it, you know, passing certain, rules and, okay, laws, to throw Jake away, which uh, removed a lot of men from Jake communities, and back then, Jake was more innocent. Jake didn't know really what was going on. All right, but now, to still participate, you know, in certain wickedness, the drugs, the street life, the game. Okay, well now, all right, you're participating in your own demise. Okay, and all these things was a setup, from the beginning. You know, dealing with the American government. It was never for Jake. Even these presidents that you thought like John F. Kennedy's and Lyndon B. Johnson's. Okay, even your Abraham Lincoln. You know, people look to him. As if he had some affection towards Jake. Okay, when he didn't want to free the slaves. Okay, and that's a whole nother topic. But the bankers play a part in all that. And that's why Abraham Lincoln, he was assassinated because he wanted, to keep the dollar, you know, linked to, the silver standard. Okay, and then they got him out of there. All right, so it was more so, all right, Abraham Lincoln, his hand was forced, by the bankers to do that. You know, which is it's another topic. I ain't went into it in a while. All right, but at the end of the day, um, you have these certain presidents that they think are Jake friendly. None of them cared about Jake. All right, and all these policies were just illusions of inclusion. Okay, to get your trust so they can further destroy you. Okay, well this guy Reagan, he did a number. Okay, on the American people. All right, even his own people. Okay, because how these devils move at the top. If you're not a part of these certain families, all right, you're expendable. Okay, so when you get to the book of Sirach 14:3, it says riches are not comely for a niggard, and what should an envious man do with money? Okay, and Esau is a definition of a niggard. Okay, and he's an envious man with money. Now let's go to this word niggard, just to get some understanding. Then we'll go back. Okay, but you have a niggard that's in power that runs the earth. Okay, it says the word niggard or niggerly, all right, in the older English text, including some Bible translation, means stingy. Okay, miserly all right, or ungenerous. Okay, and this is Esau. This is a niggard that's in power, and he shows that he's extremely stingy, man, and ungenerous. Okay, he's not generous of the blessings that the Lord has given him, and he's not generous of the people, okay, that make his system go, which are the workers. Okay, especially Jake, the tribes. It says stemming from middle old English, all right, roots, all right, and unrelated to racial slurs, though its phonic similarity causes controversy. All right, it says let's jump down. It says meaning. It says stingy. All right, a closed fist. Okay, stingy, a closed fist, ungenerous. Okay, and it says uh founder. It says found in older translations like KJV, King James. It says where it is used to describe a lack of generosity, but modern translations often use stingy or miserly or unwilling to share. Unwilling to share. Okay, and as you can see, how wealth is disputed in this man's kingdom, that he is a niggard. All right, he's stingy, he's ungenerous, and he's unwilling to share, man. He can never have enough. So that's why the Bible, going back to Sirach, okay, 14, okay, Sirach 14 and 4, it says, Sirach 14 and 3 says, riches are not comely for a niggard, and what shall an envious man do with money? Okay, so it's not a good thing. Comely goes into good, it can mean beautiful, it can mean pleasant, you know. But it's not a good thing. It's not a comely thing for a niggard, all right, to have riches, man, especially to be in control of the earth, man. All right, because this man holds the resources and wealth of the earth to himself, okay, and a small percentage up top, okay. And like I said, you're gonna see on the Ronald Reagan, okay, they began to really be niggards, man. These corporations, okay. Real quick, I'm gonna get this in the chat, and then we'll play the video. Pretty much I'll let the video pretty much roll. So let's just get this in chat, all right, and then it's gonna smile on some more in the video. Now, when you go to, all right, it said, did Ronald Reagan set the atmosphere of the current wealth gap between CEOs and employees? Did he deregulate government policies to empower corporations and take power from the working class? It says Reagan didn't single handedly create today's CEO worker wealth gap, but his policies, all right, significantly accelerated the structural, all right, forces that produced it. Okay. So when you go up to here, it says CEO worker wealth gap. Yes, Reagan was a major turning point. While inequality had been rising slowly since the 1970s, Reagan's economic and regulatory agenda shifted power toward corporations, okay, and away from workers, creating conditions in which CEO pay exploded and wages stagnated. All right. It said key ways Reagan contributed. He weakened labor unions, a major structural shift. The most symbolic moment was the 1981 firing of more than 11,000, all right, striking air traffic controllers. This signaled employers that it was now acceptable to permanently replace striking workers, aggressively oppose unionization, relocate operations to avoid unions. Union density dropped sharply after Reagan, and since unions historically raised wages, reduce inequality, and constrain executive pay, this helped, all right, widen the CEO worker pay gap, man. So unions not only, they restrain, all right, executive pay, all right, and not only do they raise, okay, workers pay, you see. So they was a regulator, all right, of the pay scale, these unions, okay? And what these corporations did with Reagan, what he was paid to do by, these major corporations was to break up these unions, to take power from these unions, okay, which left the employee what powerless, okay, against these CEOs and these major corporations, okay. And you're gonna see in the video, man, that this relationship between worker and employee of today, all right, goes back to a lot of these policies by Reagan, man. All right, it said deregulation and pro-business reforms. It said Reagan pushed extensive deregulation across finance, telecom, energy, transportation. Okay, deregulation increased corporate profitability and market concentration, giving executives much more leverage over labor and much higher compensation potential. Okay? Tax cuts that favored the wealthy and capital owners in 1981, all right, in 1986, tax reforms slashed the top marginal income tax rate from 70% to 28%, reduced corporate taxes, cut capital gain taxes, made stock based compensation far more attractive since CEOs earn heavily through stock and options. These reforms directly incentivize the massive growth in executive pay. So he cut taxes for the wealthy, and the way that they earn money, he cut taxes on the ways that they earn money, their personal earnings. Okay, and also, their corporate earnings. You see, so in every way that, the wealthy, all right, earn money, he cut taxes on. Okay, but the tax for the working class, then see cuts. You see, it says relaxing antitrust enforcement. Reagan's administration reinterpreted antitrust laws to focus strictly on consumer prices, allowing mergers, monopolization, consolidations across many industries, man. So under Reagan, all right, companies, began to monopolize. These major corporations began to buy out, smaller corporations, and begin to monopolize the market. Okay, to where they began, all right, having less competition. Okay, between these companies, which all right allowed these companies, since there was less competition. Okay, they began to be able to do shortcuts because they didn't have to compete with other companies. All right, it was never they cut down the risk of companies coming out of nowhere and and merging and surpassing these corporations that was already established. So these major corporations, they was allowed to begin to buy up these smaller corporations, which took away the competitiveness, to compete for consumers. All right. So they didn't have to compete for consumers, and then, all right, they started what coming with a more watered down product. Okay, for the sake of profit. It says this reduced competition for labor, helping suppress worker wages while increasing corporate concentration and CEO power. It says shift in economic philosophy. Reagan mainstream ideas such as government is the problem, free market allocate, all right, free markets allocate resources best. Deregulation promises growth. Wealth at the top will trickle down. Okay, so just as Trump is saying that government is the problem, is in the way of AI. Okay, Reagan was saying that government was in the problem in the way your government is the problem of economic growth. Okay, and it was a dumb policy to where you say, okay, tax the rich, okay, less, and the money would trickle down to the working class, and that never happened. That money never trickled down. Okay, money only goes one way in this predatory capitalist system, and that's up. Okay, it said these ideas shaped decades of policy under both Republican and Democrat administration. The modern CEO worker wealth gap is partly the result of this ideological shift. Okay, it said what happened to CEO worker pay after Reagan? In 1965, CEO to worker pay ratio was 20 to 1. Okay, in 65 before Reagan. In the early 1980s, during Reagan, it went up 30 to 1. In the late 1990s, right after Reagan, 200 to 1. Today's, all right, is 300 to 1 ratio at many major corporations. The inflection point aligns closely with Reagan era reforms. Okay, so did Reagan empower corporation to take power from the working class? Yes, that is a fair historically supported characterization. All right, Reagan's policy working bargaining power, reduced worker bargaining power, made it easier for corporations to resist unions, encouraged corporate consolidation, heavily rewarded capital over labor, accelerated financialization, and stock-based CEO compensation. Okay, it said these policies laid the ideological and structural foundation for today's unprecedented inequality, man. Okay, so this devil Reagan, man, he played a major part in empowering corporations. Okay, and stripping power from the working class, man. Okay, and Trump is following the same book, but it's geared more towards AI, empowering AI, okay, and stripping power from, all right, the little power that the working class has left, you know. So let's go here to this video. Let's play this, okay, and we'll go from there. All right, so she's going to expound on some of the things I was saying, and she's going to go into different things as well. So let's just play this, okay, how Reagan ruined everything. All right, this woman here, she's a leftist weirdo, you know. She's a weirdo, all right, but she have good info, okay, on particular things, you know. So let's play this.
And make America great again.
Make America great again.
Make America great again.
And we will make America great again.
Ronald Reagan for president. Let's make America great again.
Ronald Reagan is considered by some to be the greatest president in the history of the United States. I've always understood that to mean that people loved his version of supply-side economics, also known as trickle-down economics. Tax the rich less, and the benefits would trickle down to all of society. That's just basic economics. Well, turns out, no it's not, and also Reagan's trickle-down theory is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the many theories and agendas that Reagan pushed during his administration. Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980. The 8 years that followed ushered in not only the largest redistribution of wealth in a generation, but also the termination of welfare benefits for thousands of Americans, a dramatic rollback of unions and labor organizing, and an infiltration of Christian fundamentalism into American government, the consequences of which we are still very much feeling to this day. Ronald Reagan walked so that Donald Trump could run, and he altered the American way of life for everyone but the top 1%. 40 years after first being elected president, the myth of Ronald Reagan still lives on in the minds of people who are too deluded to see that the American dream Reagan stood for is the same American dream he irreversibly decimated during his time as president. This is how Reagan ruined everything. Before I get into all the ways that Reagan royally screwed us over, I want to take a minute to thank my partner on today's video, Hungry Root. Hungry Root is an online grocery service that makes it super easy to eat healthy. But it is hard to pinpoint another president that has had such enduring and wide-ranging negative impacts on the American way of life. I'm going to unpack Reagan's impact by focusing on who and what he hurt, namely the middle class, minorities, and democracy. Starting with the middle class, let's talk about what Reagan is most known for: Reaganomics, a theory of supply-side economics that says that by removing regulations on businesses and lowering their taxes, they would be able to be more productive, have more freedom to be agile in the market, and that growth would then translate to more jobs and higher wages for workers. The wealth would start at the top and it would trickle down to everyone. When Reagan took office, the US was going through what was called stagflation, where both inflation and unemployment rates were high. The country was in the worst recession since the Great Depression at the time. Because of this, people were primed for major economic change, and Reagan ushered in that change. After the Great Depression, the New Deal came with huge amounts of government spending on everything from mortgage financing for whites only, more on that in my last video on housing segregation, to job creation, to building infrastructure, and these government programs were popular because they did grow the economy and create jobs and build a large, thriving middle class in America. Minimum wages stayed consistent with productivity. The more productive the average worker was, the more the minimum wage increased. That connection was broken, however, as the US tax code began moving away from the New Deal. Reagan wasn't the sole president responsible for creating tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, but he sure did it with the most gusto and to the largest degree. Before Reagan's presidency, income tax on the wealthiest Americans, that's the money that they had to pay to the government as a proportion of how much they made each year, was at 70%. So above a certain threshold, the wealthiest Americans had to pay 70% of their income to the government. By the end of Reagan's presidency, that number dropped to 28%. He also created major tax breaks for corporations and estates, all in the name of creating smaller government and putting more money in the hands of the wealthiest people and companies in the country. Some of the effects of his economic policies in the short term were positive. The period of stagflation became less pronounced. Inflation and unemployment both decreased, but those numbers belie the fact that the connection between wealth and productivity was severed, and the rich got richer while the poor and middle class saw very little economic progress during this time. The incomes of the lowest 90% rose by 17%, while those of the top 10% rose by 106%. Talk about a trickle. In the years since Reagan's presidency, that gap between rich and poor has continued to widen. Today, the top 10% of income earners in the US hold 72% of the total wealth. And the bottom half of income earners, the 50% of the American population, holds 2% of the wealth. Between 1978 and 2021, average worker compensation increased 18.1%. The top CEO compensation increased 1,460% in that same time period. In 1980, the average CEO earned 36 times more money than the average worker, and today the average CEO earns 400 times more. The wealthiest have never been wealthier, while for the average worker, wages haven't even kept up with inflation. This shit ain't trickling, Ronnie. What now? And it's not like at the time Reagan implemented trickle-down economics in the early 80s that it was this brand new, newfangled invention that everyone was optimistic about. A lot of people were like, hey, this is really going to hurt poor people. But Ronnie was convinced by his neoliberal economic pals that keeping the wealthiest people happy will mean prosperity for all. Because Ronald Reagan was convinced that the American dream was alive and well. And the common theme through all of his policy choices was that individuals are the creators of their own destiny, that anyone could pick themselves up by their bootstraps if they really wanted to, and that any struggling was simply a moral failure on the part of the individual and not a failing on the part of the system that stood on their necks. And it was through Reagan that this idea that the government is your enemy and stands in the way of your freedom and prosperity really took hold in the Republican consciousness writ large, to the point that working and middle class people voted to re-elect him, even though it was actively against their own best interest to do so. Sound familiar? This was clear in his trickle-down economic policy, but it was also clear in his stance on labor rights. The 20th century saw a peak in labor unions, especially in the 40s and 50s, when over 1/3 of all workers in the US were members of a union. Unions were strong and could mount strong challenges against employers, and they brought about important labor laws like the 8-hour workday, minimum wage, child labor laws, and civil rights laws in the 1960s. During this period, Ronald Reagan himself was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, a labor union for actors. At some point in the 50s, Ronald flipped from Democrat to Republican. He claimed it was because his party, the Democrats, failed him. It could also be that while he was president of the Screen Actors Guild, he granted a rare waiver to MCA, his own talent agency, to allow them to start producing television shows. They needed a waiver because it was a real conflict of interest when the people who managed talent.
And Ronald Reagan was an actor, you know? You see, these people are groomed okay, to play these parts as president. Okay, he was an actor. Okay, he was a Democrat. All right, but by the time he made it to the White House, he was this economist. He was this genius in economy. All right, Republican man. Okay, it sounds like your guy Donald Trump, man, Donald T. Okay, an actor, but now he's this economical genius, Republican. Okay, and Trump went from Democrat to Republican, man. Showing you is one of the same. These people are who they need to be when they need to be for the convenience, okay, of the elites, the powers that be. Okay.
Become the people who also hire the talent. You see, after that waiver was granted, Reagan conveniently was given a cushy TV job through MCA that paid him $125,000 per year in 1950s money, and he became a walking spokesman for GE, an influencer before there were influencers. The FBI eventually investigated MCA and the waiver granted to them by the Screen Actors Guild, including Reagan, for anti-competitive behavior. Nothing came of the probe for Reagan, though MCA was forced to break up. It was around this time that Reagan conveniently was like, you know what? Fuck unions. Fuck the government. Too many regulations. I'm a Republican now. Interesting. But he, of course, used his history as a union president to his advantage while running for governor of California and later for United States president, pointing out that he was the only candidate who's actually been president of a labor union in order to win over the working class white vote. Convenient.
Where free unions and collective bargaining are forbidden, freedom is lost.
And a lot of them voted for him, which was against their self-interest. And that was made abundantly clear not long into his presidency when in 1981, PATCO, the Air Traffic Controllers Union, went on strike to demand better working conditions and increased pay. See, the problem with this is that workers were technically federal employees, and it was against the law for federal employees to strike. Roughly half of all U.S. flights were grounded during the strike. And Reagan held a press conference on the matter and made his stance very clear.
And if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
And then 2 days later, 12,000 federal air traffic controllers lost their jobs and were barred from ever working for the federal government again. It was a show of strength that debilitated the organized labor movement, and it hasn't recovered since. Where at its peak, union membership accounted for over a third of all workers in the United States, by the end of Reagan's presidency, that number was cut in half. Today, union membership accounts for roughly 10% of all workers, which is a historic low. The reason for this dramatic decrease in union members is twofold. One, Reagan's firing of the air traffic controllers sent a strong message to the private sector that union busting is fair game. And two, Reagan appointed his own cronies to head the National Labor Relations Board, the federal board that oversees unions. And they worked to loosen regulations on businesses and let them get away with nearly whatever they wanted. And the suppression of the labor movement is shown in the numbers, not only in the dwindling number of union members, but also in the dramatic decrease in strikes, a common tool used by unions to counteract the power imbalance between workers and corporations. Prior to 1979, there were on average between 200 and 400 large-scale labor strikes on any given year. There were 187 in 1980. By 1989, there were 40. And in 2017, there were 7. Even the recent stirrings we've seen to unionize Amazon facilities, Starbucks coffee shops, and recently the first unionized strip club pales in comparison to the power of the labor unions in the middle of the 20th century that helped shift the balance of power away from the large corporations who had all the money and all the bargaining chips into the hands of workers. For example, my experience, having worked numerous jobs in the 21st century, is that companies treat you like they're doing you a favor by giving you a job. You should be so lucky. And you have to show loyalty to the company above all else. Otherwise, you're a bad worker. They pay you what they want. They fire you whenever they want. And they do not have to give one flying fart about you because you are replaceable to them. They hold all the power. You want a job, take it or leave it. Most of them don't even list the pay range on their job postings unless they're legally required to. And if you were to ask for the pay range up front before putting in the effort to apply for the job, well, you might as well just not apply for the job because no hiring manager is going to look favorably on that. You're supposed to want the job because you're passionate about widgets and working for that company. Doing a job for money is not the team player attitude that we're looking for. Not to mention the fact that HR exists to keep the company from getting sued, not to protect your interests. So you can see how unions are so powerful because it's only through collective bargaining and organizing that workers can balance out the power with their employers. Okay, sorry, I needed to go down that labor organizing tangent, but it really can't be overstated the devastating impact of the Reagan administration on workers' rights and workers' income. This combination, the huge tax cuts for the wealthy and the busting of unions, absolutely decimated the middle class and concentrated the power and money in the hands of big business and the top 10%. But it wasn't just the middle class he was coming after. Before taking office, Reagan ran for president in 1976 and lost the Republican nomination to incumbent Gerald Ford. During that first presidential run, Reagan was touting the failures of big government and discussing what he claimed was rampant abuse of the country's welfare system. And he kept coming back to this same story.
In Chicago, they found a woman who holds the record. She used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers to collect food stamps, Social Security, veterans benefits for 4 non-existent deceased veterans' husbands, as well as welfare. Her tax-free cash income alone has been running $150,000 a year.
The welfare queen. You know her, you love her. She's a scam artist. She's having babies just to make more money from the government. She's a liar. She's a cheat. She's sucking the system dry. She's black and she's everywhere. Boo. In reality, this story Reagan kept telling out of Chicago was about a woman named Linda Taylor. Her crimes were many. She was a scam artist. She was tried and convicted of welfare fraud, but the total they could prove she ever defrauded the government for was $8,000. Not $150,000 per year, nor was she an accurate example of welfare recipients, because most...
All right. So you see, even back then, okay, they was using this whole thing with welfare, okay, as the problem with the economy, not the wickedness that they was doing, with these corporations, enriching these corporations, and stripping, the working class from any leverage or power against these corporations. That wasn't the problem, okay? But the source of all the economical, failures, by the American government is, the welfare. Now Eve does wild out with the welfare, having babies, just to get more money, with random men, just, it's a shit show with a lot of, everybody on welfare isn't like that, but Eve is on there wilding out. It can't be, negated. But it shows you like just Reagan, the same talking points Reagan had is the exact same talking points that Trump has. So Trump is like a Reagan, 2.0, just with AI on the scene, more technology. Trump is like a Reagan with more, technology. Now, like I say, she's gonna go left a little bit because she's a leftist, so she sympathize with, the left, the alphabet and particular things. But I think she has one more point that I wanted to get. Probably jump up a little bit. I think let's see.
Solely your responsibility and your fault for not lifting yourself up by your bootstraps. And you know who else didn't bootstrap themselves enough? The gays. Oh, you thought the gays weren't part of this? Think again. Ever heard of a little thing called AIDS? Yeah, well, it was fucking rampant in the 80s. It started in the 70s, but no one really knew what it was. And by 1981, at the start of Reagan's presidency, it was becoming an epidemic. It took the death of a friend for Reagan to even give a shit about this disease that was killing thousands on his watch. And it would take him 2 more years before he even acknowledged the disease in an official press conference in 1987. By that time, over 30,000 people had contracted the disease and 20,000 people had died in the US alone. But again, even after he finally acknowledged the AIDS epidemic for what it was, he was reluctant to acknowledge it again. Funding for AIDS research under Reagan was slow to come, and it's unclear how the trajectory of the AIDS epidemic would have been different if Reagan had acknowledged it for what it was. syphilis, a deadly and unknown disease that was killing thousands of Americans, regardless of sexuality or drug use.
And it was unleashed, okay? And it was because she went into it with Dr. Fauci, but I didn't want to get too much into it with that. But it was Fauci, under Fauci, you know, because he was just like he was the his position that he had under Trump. He had the same position under Reagan, okay? And that's when, you know, the AIDS, okay, was rampant, okay? So he played a part in unleashing that, and that was an attack on Jake, you know, sickle cell, you know, all these particular things, you know. Of course, other people get affected, all right, but there was another attack on Jake, you know. So under Reagan, you had the, the drugs flood America, all right, mainly Jake communities, okay. And then you had the AIDS, okay, disease, okay, under on the Reagan. So this devil, he's one of them devils, man. Some devils, you know, in the Hall of Fame, okay, a deviltry, you know, if that's a word, okay, but he's one of them, okay. So let's play this more.
Instead, it remained on the fringes of his presidency for years because, again, in the tidy imagination of his ideal American vision, you are the product of your own actions. You have only yourself to blame. You did gay sex. You injected drugs. Just bootstrap yourself out of AIDS. In this way, Reagan was able to
and what you know, alphabet behavior is terrible, okay? And, you know, the Most High was, you know, he still plagues the alphabet community with a lot of diseases, you know, because that's completely wicked, okay? So, yeah, dealing with that is completely off. You see, they get whatever they get, damn them, you know. But, because even today, you know, if you live that lifestyle, it costs, you know, your employer, you know, almost twice as much to insure you because that's deemed an extreme lifestyle, okay, a hazardous lifestyle because of the diseases associated with that, you know, which that's a plague from the Most High because that's an abomination, you know.
disconnect his policies from the outcomes of his policies. It's the moral failure of individuals, not anything he's done. It's one of the reasons that he's known as the Teflon president. Despite his many failures and despite the many ways in which he was an incredibly imperfect president, he managed to avoid the reputational damage that most presidents experience and come out the other side as this mythical hero that Republicans still revere to this day. And nothing made more clear Reagan's lasting negative impact on our democracy like the presidency of Donald Trump. In both Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan, we had presidents who were also master showmen. And Reagan really introduced what Trump has seemed to perfect, manipulating the media to his advantage and using dog whistles to ignite his base of supporters. Nancy and Ronald Reagan were both actors before entering the White House. And Ronnie's abilities in front of the camera, his abilities to deliver a line, and his ability to provide a convincing song and dance routine came in handy time and again throughout his presidency. In the Reagans, the media finally had this showy, easily televised president they'd always dreamed of. The Reagans were always ready for a photo op because they understood the power of pictures. They understood that pictures often conveyed a stronger message than what was being said or going on behind the scenes. Sure, we're slashing your benefits, kowtowing to big business, and rubbing elbows with rich people during the worst recession since the Great Depression. We're also just like you. We're sunshiny and pleasant. We live on a ranch. We're just a couple of cowboys. Reagan was able to use his acting experience to follow the scripts that were given to him, to position himself as folksy and all-American, and to build himself and his vision of America into this myth that still persists today. All the while, Reagan was able to use the media during his campaign for presidency and when he reached the White House to drop dog whistles for his supporters who were almost entirely white. And he was really the first person to perfect the dog whistle and use it to his political advantage. For example, he believed in the ultimate right of the individual to own property and to do what he wanted with that property, including excluding whoever he wants from that property. Wink. He believes in states' rights. Wink. And he warned his supporters of the increased dangers in our cities, of welfare queens, and of a need for increased law and order to quell the, and I quote, jungle paths taking root throughout the country. Yikes. He was sunshiny and folksy, but in the end, Reagan was able to capitalize on what Trump later perfected: fear. Fear of economic instability and fear of racial unrest. All the while fanning the flame of both issues and actively working against the best interest of the base that he is actively fear-mongering. And the final way that Reagan managed to undermine our democracy using a tactic that Trump later perfected was by aligning himself and the Republican Party with white evangelical Christians. The Christian right presented themselves as an opportunity for Reagan. They aligned on many of the same social issues like abortion and tax cuts, and especially the idea of the individual's responsibility for their own fate, that bootstrapping ideology that Reagan clung to. If you need welfare, it's because you're lazy and you should just get a job. If you don't want to go to hell, you're a sinner and it's up to you to get into heaven. Any moral failure and it's straight to the bowels of hell for you. Not only that, but it turns out the evangelicals have a lot of money. One group of the religious right that had particular sway was called the moral majority. It fought against abortion, the Equal Rights Amendment, and in favor of the family and traditional family values. It was founded in the 70s as a response to counterculture and the gay rights and women's rights movements of the previous decades, and it had a powerful lobbying arm. The moral majority is credited with helping Reagan win the 1980 presidential election. It was through the moral majority and Christian fundamentalists that Reagan was able to find a strong and fervent base of supporters. So it was, of course, in his best interest to make religion take a center stage in his politics. At the 1984 Republican convention, Reagan addressed a group of Christians saying, "The truth is, politics and morality are inseparable, and as morality..."
So as you can, let me see. Yeah, so as you can see, all right, Trump is just a Reagan 2.0. You know, same play. And I think there was even an assassination attempt on Reagan as well. Okay. So Reagan appealed to the evangelists, all right, Edomite Christians. Okay, just as Trump does. You know, the same play. You know, and it says, yes, I asked, was there an attempt on Ronald Reagan's life? It says, yes, there was a major assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan on March 30, 1981, when John Hinckley Jr. shot him outside the Washington, Hilton Hotel. Reagan was seriously wounded, along with the White House Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, and D.C. police officer Thomas Dillahunty. All right, though all survived the attack. Hinckley's motive was an obsession with actress, obsession with actress Jodie Foster, inspired by film, okay, Taxi Driver. Okay, so there's no telling what that was, but you know, was it authentic or not? But you know, Reagan was shot in the chest. You know, oh boy. Let me see. Yeah, so yeah, man. You know, it's just a lot of, you know, this how you devils do, man. You know, everything's is a psyop. All right, so let's go here. To the book of James, chapter 5. You know, this is James chapter 5, verse 1 in the AMP. It says, "Come quickly now, you rich, all right, who lack true faith and hoard and misuse your resources." Hoard, going back to a nigger. Okay. Weep and howl over the miseries, all right, the woes, the judgments that are coming upon you, man. Because this devil is just, like this devil could still be crazy winning and everybody else be okay. Okay, because there's nothing wrong with having wealth, and there's going to be, okay, the ruling class is going to have more than everyone else. Okay, that's understandable. But the way that this nigga does it, man, is on a whole nother level of wickedness, man. Okay, and there's a judgment, and this is just one of the many reasons the Lord going to judge this man. How he's going to judge him. It says your wealth has rotted and is ruined. All right, it's rotted and is ruined, and your fine clothes have been moth-eaten, man. You know, but this devil just got this old money, man, just rotting away, man. The earth is starving. Infrastructure is terrible, man. Okay, people are in the worst position that they've ever been, and his man is wealthy than he's ever been. Okay, it says your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, man. Yeah, this old money, all this wealth that you have hoarded, and the condition of the planet Earth, man, it don't add up. The condition of people in your kingdom, the circumstances that these people are in your kingdom, and all this wealth you have hoarded, it don't add up, man. Okay, and it's gonna be a witness that you are a wicked niggard, man. Okay, it says, and will consume your flesh like fire. It says, you have stored up your treasures in the last days when it will do you, all right, when it will do you no good. You see, because you're finna be judged from Yahweh Bashim Shai. So all this treasure that you have hoarded up, all right, it's not gonna be a factor. All the resources, all the system that you got, Reaganomics, capitalism, you know, techno feudalism, and all this ism, net, and all, nigga, it ain't gonna matter. Okay, none of that's gonna matter when the Lord, all right, when the appointed time of judgment comes up on your ass, man. It said, look, the wages that you have fraudulently withheld from the laborers who have mowed your fields, okay, are crying out against you for vengeance. And the cries of the harvesters have come, all right, to the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth, man. You know, so the Israelites, just like in ancient Egypt, when we cried out, okay, and the Lord, okay, came through and delivered us, it's the same situation now, you know, because Esau, he's the new Pharaoh, okay, and you Edomites that are losing, that's between you and your higher ups, man. But with Israel, it's between us and our power. We have a power to cry to, okay, in the midst of this, right, injustice, man. The Israelites that have came back, to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Al Shai. We have a power to cry out to, man. Okay, this is it's like Exodus 6:5 to prove that this is Israelites, man. It says, and I have also heard the groaning of the sons of Israel, whom the Egyptians have enslaved, and I have faithfully remembered my covenant with Abraham, okay, and Isaac and Jacob. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I'm the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Al Shai, and I will bring you out from under the bondage and the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will free you from their bondage. I will redeem and rescue you with an outstretched, all right, vigorous, powerful arm, okay, and with great acts of judgment against Egypt, man. And he can do the same thing to America, man, with vigorous, powerful arm, which is Yahweh Shai, and then the Heavenly Father finna show great acts of judgment against, all right, spiritual Egypt, which is America, man. And ultimately, this whole beast system is finna be touched with the judgment of Yahweh Bashem Al Shai, man. Hey. So yeah, man, you Edomites, y'all got y'all Reagan 2.0, okay, and he finishing off where Reagan started, man. Okay, stripping you down to nothing while enriching, all right, the wealthy, man. Okay, so that was the point, Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters edified once again, and give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Kakadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers, and peace and blessing, salutation to the hopeful like Shalom.